at that time, I had a student who I was working with on issues of sustainability, and he went off to India, to Aurobindo, to visit Aurobindo and to study what was going on at Aurobindo. And while he was at Aurobindo, he got a copy of The Life Divine, and he brought it back, and while he was bringing it back, he tried to read it. Now, I don't know how many of you have picked up this tome or looked at segments of this tome online, but it is a remarkable piece of writing because it does not allow you to just approach it as if you're reading the back of a cereal box in the morning. It does not present itself as information that will allow you to just take it up seamlessly in a kind of uploading fashion. It's written in a very different way than this, my student, who is a brilliant mathematician, was accustomed. So he read it and he said, you know, this sounds kind of like some of the crazy stuff that you read, so how about I give it to you and see what you make of it, you know, namaste. And so he gave it to me, and I opened it, and I felt like as if I was like mounted upon, you know, the broom of a witch, you know. I was swept up into its poetics. And so I would never claim to be a scholar of Aurobindo. I'm a fan of Aurobindo. I'm an experiencer of Aurobindo. But because I had the opportunity to come here, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I found to be useful about the practice of reading Aurobindo. And I want to slow down a little bit there and just notice that formulation already, that it is a practice to read Aurobindo. We have to alter our sense of what we're doing when we read in order to read Aurobindo, or frankly, to read any self-transformational text. It's not information that we're taking in, which we now know, and we can add to the database of knowledge. It also includes things like that. But what it is a grappling with a delivery of a kind of beautiful narration of what it's like to be, for lack of a better term, in the stillness, in Satchitananda. And it's a beautiful anticipation of the objections that the ordinary conscious mind is going to make to the very possibility of being in Satchitananda or stillness. And it is an iterative reading. In other words, it's repetitious. If you read The Life Divine, and I really highly recommend it as a practice. It seems, again, impossible because it's, it's almost 1,200 pages. And reading is becoming kind of possibly rarer than meditation and therefore even more powerful in certain ways, right? That, someone usefully commented before our gathering that, the book version of the dialogues that I've done with Gary has a kind of different effect than watching the videos. And I said, yeah, that's kind of where we're at, isn't it? That we have to be reminded that reading has a power over us, right? So reading Aurobindo as a practice, I mean very seriously. And I mean it seriously in the context of psychedelics, because that's the thing that it appears like, even from email, I could tell that Larry's eyes kind of bugged out when I used Aurobindo and psychedelics in the same sentence. That there was a kind of, how could these two things go together? And again, all I can do is narrate my own experience. But part of, as you well know, in which I try to narrate in the abstract for this discussion, is a really very funny, paradoxical little joke that psychedelics play on our contemporary paradigm, which is, on the one hand, they're composed of matter, right? That psilocybin is a stable form of matter that is recognizable as psilocybin. LSD, the components of ayahuasca, it's a little bit fuzzier, but we know that there's this molecule. And so in that sense, we can say, aha, like a la Francis Crick, who spent a lot of time on this peninsula. We can say, aha, and also who was a psychonaut, one who uses psychedelics. We can say, we've figured out the brain. It's just a bag of chemicals interacting, and we can systematically look and see how those chemicals interact, and we'll have an aha experience. But a funny thing happened on the way to the psychonaut's house, which is that if you look closely at the effect of psychedelics, and not just the molecule that composes the psychedelics, that the effects of psychedelics, as many of you probably know, were well characterized by Timothy Leary in the 1960s as absolutely and fundamentally dependent on what he called set and setting. So at the very moment that it seems that we have a materialist explanation of our experience of consciousness, we run into the quandary of the fact that the effect of psilocybin or LSD on human consciousness depends. And it depends on an infinite set of variables that can be manipulated according to set and setting, which means who is the person who is taking it, and what is the context in which they're taking it. And this is an infinitely, what Leary called, programmable state, such that somebody like John Lilly, for example, who did pioneering research on, invented the flotation tank, and then did research on LSD in the flotation tank, which seems like an even better job than investigating ayahuasca in Peru, determined that he could use different scripts. And so, for example, if he believed, and this introduces us to Aurobindo, I hope, if he posited the existence of an alien deity and then went into the flotation tank under the experience of LSD 25, he had a better time than if he didn't. Right? That the hypothesis, what I called in a book rhetorical software that he used in the experience, was at least as powerful as the molecule itself. So, going on a macro scale, the worldview that we bring to the psychedelic experience in many ways influences the outcome of the psychedelic experience at least as much as what it is that we are using. So that means that the real space for the investigation of psychedelic experience takes place not at the molecular level, but in the space that ERIE is investigating, this space of integration, this space of experimenting with what kinds of contexts and points of view with which to approach what occurs in psychedelic experience. Now, Leary could only carry out this hypothesis, alien deity, yes or no, if he was actually able to occupy that experimental position of not knowing. In other words, he couldn't just change his mind and say, okay, now it exists, and now it doesn't exist. He needed to be able to enter into the state, in fact, of what Gary was talking about, of stillness, of not actually having a thought, and then experimentally having a thought about the nature of this experience, right? So how do you do that? Well, I had a meditation practice before I drank ayahuasca, and I think that was very conducive to being able to experience the thoughtless state. But I also think that a different conception of mind is extraordinarily helpful for being able to navigate what ensues in the psychedelic experience. And this is where Aurobindo is perhaps his most powerful, I think, in my experience. So I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, you're probably aware of this, but an entire generation of scientific knowledge is about to die out, because what happens with the accumulation of scientific knowledge is that things are only cited that have been done in the last 5 to 6 years, right? That, for example, in 1961 to 1971, there was a man named Roland Fisher at Ohio State University that did thousands of human subject trials with psilocybin on undergraduates at Ohio State University at that time. But it never gets cited in the work of NYU or Hopkins, et cetera, because it may as well have just disappeared. And so for a while I made it a practice, and I still try to actually kind of get to know scientists who are entering into their 80s and finding out, like, what is the knowledge that they have to transmit. So one of these people, Stanley Salty, was an amazing systems scientist. I went to see him after some of the more powerful ayahuasca openings I experienced. And I told him all this stuff, and I was very animated. And he said, suppose I told you that all of this is entirely in your own mind. And, of course, by that he meant, to negate what I was saying. But my response was, wow, what is my mind such that it can do that? What is my mind such that it can make it appear that there are golden scaled anacondas in the base of this starship that I'm flying in as I go to Jupiter or not, right? I thought my mind was just this kind of like mundane processing unit up here that was trying to figure out how to avoid the fact that it was going to die someday. That's pretty cool. And so when I started to investigate, well, what are some alternative metaphors of mind besides the fact that it's this closed, empty stranger in a strange land that each of us lives in a kind of unique cell of awareness and never have any interaction with any other mind, right? That what are the alternative, perspectives from the history of philosophy and science? And it's here where Aurobindo's, what I called in the abstract, poetics of the supramental, really did their work on me, because there's three words, because I want to make sure we have time for questions, but there's three words that I wanted to use to summarize what's most useful about doing this work with Aurobindo and really allowing yourself to be worked over here. And those three words are danger, surrender, and evolution. So the danger that I wanted to bring out is, we all, like, even now in the Bay Area, even saying the word psychedelics, yeah, see? Yeah, that was good, right? It creates this kind of, is it okay to say that? Right, is that, we associate it with such extraordinary danger. But what's really interesting is that the real danger, from my point of view, is the incredibly toxic growth of institutional control over access to the inner realm, which we call religion. If we begin to compare the danger of psychedelics with the danger of religion, I don't even need to finish the sentence. Okay? Maybe I just say ISIS, right? And that can do some magical work as well. So I think what's really important is to wonder and tarry over this story we have. There's no such thing as a tool that can't be misused, right?